The term hermeneutics comes from the Greek word hermēneuō, which means translate or interpret. Hermeneutics, therefore, is the theory and method of interpreting texts. Originally used for biblical interpretation, it has been later extended to the interpretation of other written texts, as well as of verbal and nonverbal communication. Today, hermeneutics is primarily understood as a philosophical discipline, which deals with questions of what enables interpretation and understanding. In this video, we will explore what hermeneutics is, by examining its history, key philosophers, and main ideas. One of the oldest works on hermeneutics is Aristotle's treatise entitled On Interpretation, which offered a theory that laid the groundwork for many later theories of interpretation and semiotics. Hermeneutics, however, only began to develop during the early Christian period, where it was used primarily to interpret the Bible. It later on extended to the interpretation of legal documents during the late Middle Ages, and to philology during the Renaissance. With the Reformation, hermeneutics became more explicit and systematic. Protestants wanted to interpret the scriptures more properly. They rejected allegorical interpretation and insisted on the letter of the text, hoping to retrieve the Bible's meaning from distortions introduced by the Church and by scholasticism. Many hermeneutical scholars view this period as the genesis of modern hermeneutics. In his book Elements of Grammar, Hermeneutics and Criticism, Friedrich Schleiermacher distinguished three levels of understanding a text: historical, grammatical, and spiritual. Historical understanding involves the establishment of the authentic text, by comparing different manuscripts and deploying knowledge of the history and other writings of the period. To this understanding corresponds the hermeneutics of the letter. While in grammatical understanding, corresponding to the hermeneutics of the sense, one understands the meaning of the words and sentences in the text. Lastly, in spiritual understanding, one ascends from the literal meaning to the spirit of the author and of their society, in German, Geist, which means outlook, mentality, or worldview. In his lectures on the Encyclopedia of Classical Studies, Friedrich Wolff defined hermeneutics as the science of the rules by which the meaning of signs is discerned. Its aim is to grasp the written, or even merely spoken thoughts of someone else, just as he would have them grasped. This involves not only knowledge of the language of the text, but also historical knowledge, a knowledge of the author's life, of the history and geography of their country. In other words, an interpreter should ideally know everything known by the author. In addition to the theories of his predecessors, Friedrich Schleiermacher introduced the concept of the hermeneutical circle. According to Schleiermacher, we are involved in a hermeneutical circle at each level of interpretation. That is, we cannot know the correct reading of a passage in a text, unless we know, roughly, the text as a whole. And conversely, we cannot know the text as a whole, unless we know its particular passages. Likewise, we cannot fully understand a text, unless we know about its author and the culture from which it emerged. But we cannot understand such author and culture, unless we know the texts that constitute them. Moreover, Schleiermacher argued that there may be more to an author's thought than the meaning of the words he uses to express it. This may be for several reasons, such as the author expressing himself badly, a slip of the pen or the tongue, a lack of verbal facility, or a malapropism. To understand an utterance fully, therefore, an interpreter must go beyond the meaning of the words, and ask about its author's intentions or the spirit of his culture and age. Wilhelm Dilthey used hermeneutics to answer the question, how do the social or human sciences differ from the natural sciences? According to him, while the natural sciences explain, the social sciences understand. They understand not simply texts and utterances, but any meaningful objectification or expression of human life, such as gestures, one's own or another's life, paintings, institutions, past events, etc. From here he proposed two types of understanding. First, elementary understanding, or the understanding of simple expressions such as a passage, an utterance, or a gesture. Here there is no gulf between the expression and the experience expressed, meaning we understand them immediately without any inference. Second, higher understanding, the understanding that deals with complex wholes, such as a text, a life, or a culture. Using this distinction, Dilthey argued that a part, say, a passage, has a meaning grasped by elementary understanding, while the whole, a text, has a sense resulting from the ordered composition of its parts, and grasped by higher understanding. Higher understanding, he pointed out, is often provoked by a failure of elementary understanding. If I cannot immediately understand a person's action, for example, I explore their culture or their life as a whole. If I cannot understand a sentence, I may interpret the whole book. Often when elementary understanding fails, this is because a person, the author of a text, or the doer of an action, is unusual, and cannot be understood by the normal standards of objective spirit. To understand what the author says or a person does, we need to understand them in their individuality. Thus, higher understanding usually involves the understanding of individuals, not simply the general understanding used in everyday life. Martin Heidegger connected questions about the meaning of historical texts with questions about the meaning of life. He used the term hermeneutic of facticity in his lectures of 1923 to refer to his interpretation of the human being, what he called Dasein, and everyday life. His magnum opus, Being and Time, was a hermeneutic in several ways. It explored Dasein's own understanding and interpreting. Dasein understands and interprets, not merely incidentally, but essentially and constantly. It understands, it knows its way around in the world as a field for its own activities, and interprets entities within the world. It sees a table as a table, a chair as a chair, etc. According to Heidegger, Dasein's interpretation involves presuppositions. To interpret something as a book, I must be familiar with a world in which books have a place, a world of rooms, shelves, readers, etc. Moreover, he argues that words do not have fixed, univocal meanings independent of their use and application. Meanings accrue to words from the significant interrelationships that constitute our world. A hammer, for example, is not simply a tool for hammering. Its meaning derives from the context of nails, wood, chair, etc. that constitutes the world of the craftsman. In other words, what a word means depends on the world of its user. And to understand a text, therefore, we need to go beyond dictionaries and grammars, to reconstruct the world of its author and the possibilities it offered. With Heidegger, the concept of hermeneutical circle now includes interpreters and their presuppositions, in addition to the text, its author and culture, as pointed out by previous hermeneutic scholars. In his work entitled Truth and Method, Gadamer elaborated on Heidegger's concept of hermeneutics. For him, hermeneutics is not a process in which an interpreter finds a particular meaning, but a philosophical effort to account for understanding as the ontological process of man. His project, therefore, was to uncover the nature of human understanding, specifically of how understanding, whether of texts, works of art, or experiences, is possible at all. Following Heidegger's temporal analysis of human existence, Gadamer argued that people have a historically affected consciousness. This means that because they are embedded in a particular history and culture, they have certain prejudices that affect how they make interpretations. For Gadamer, however, these prejudices are not something that hinder their ability to make interpretations, but rather are the basis of understanding new experiences. In interpreting a text, because both the text and the interpreter find themselves within a particular historical tradition, what Gadamer calls a horizon, it therefore involves what is called a fusion of horizons. As an interpreter seeks to understand a text, a common horizon emerges. This fusion of horizons, however, does not mean the interpreter now fully understands some kind of objective meaning, but is an event in which a world opens itself to him, resulting in a deeper understanding of the subject matter. Gadamer further explains the hermeneutical experience as a dialogue. For Gadamer, text interpretation is like the give and take of question and answer. As such, the interpretation of a given text can change depending on the questions the interpreter asks of it. While meaning emerges not as an object that lies in the text or in the interpreter, but rather an event that results from the interaction of the two. If you find our videos helpful, please consider supporting our channel, or check out these other videos.